The destruction of the individual. Last week, we began sharing insights into the origins and functions of the state gained from studying psychologist Dr. Carl Jung's last book before his death, The Undiscovered Self. In that article, we looked at the way that human minds filter facts discovered through scientific experimentation to fit their personal beliefs, and how this leads them to totally misunderstand humanity, which can only be understood at the individual level. In this article, we continue to explore the insights that Dr. Jung's work can provide to us. From page 8 of The Undiscovered Self, quote, "Under the influence of scientific assumptions, not only the psyche but the individual man, and indeed all individual events whatsoever, suffer a leveling down and a process of blurring that distorts the picture of reality into a conceptual average. We ought not to underestimate the psychological effect of the statistical world picture. It deplaces the individual in favor of anonymous units that pile up into mass formations. Science supplies us with, instead of the concrete individual, the names of organizations, and at the highest point, the abstract idea of the state as the principle of political reality. The moral responsibility of the individual is then inevitably replaced by the policy of the state. Instead of moral and mental differentiation of the individual, you have public welfare and the raising of the living standard." End quote. We stop treating humans as individuals when we start thinking of humans as we do plant matter or bacteria in a lab experiment. When we do so, it destroys our ability to see humans as individuals, and when we do so, we start treating them like objects without thoughts, feelings, hopes, or dreams. We stop caring about whether we are helping a person and start caring about whether the numerical results of our social experiments seem good to us on paper. Like the denizens of Ursula K. Le Guin's fictional utopia Omulus, we become completely comfortable in torturing, dehumanizing, and destroying individuals as long as the collective appears happy. With such a worldview, a scientific worldview, autocracy becomes inevitable. Quote, "The goal and meaning of individual life, which is the only real life, no longer lie in individual development, but in the policy of the state, which is thrust upon the individual from outside and consists in the execution of an abstract idea which ultimately tends to attract all life to itself. The individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as to how he should live his own life, and is instead ruled, fed, and clothed and educated as a social unit, accommodated in the appropriate housing unit, and amused in accordance with the standards that give pleasure and satisfaction to the masses. The rulers, in their turn, are just as much social units as the ruled, and are distinguished only by the fact that they are specialized mouthpieces of the state doctrine. They do not need to be personalities capable of judgment, but thoroughgoing specialists who are unusable outside their line of business. State policy decides what shall be taught and studied." Now that's from page 8 of Carl Jung's book. So when one holds a worldview that dehumanizes people, ignores the individual, and focuses solely on the collective, the only outcome possible is totalitarianism. Those moral busybodies who believe they are omniscient enough, omnipotent enough, and omnibenevolent enough to rectify all evils and order all things for the good of all, naturally enough, try to become omnipresent enough to do so. But since they are localized and contained by their own individual reality, they must develop a way to collectivize and be everywhere at once. The way they do this is through the Leviathan of the state. Into its power and under its control they place everything. Nothing spread for the individual in order for himself or herself. As the power of the state increases, its control over society grows proportionally. Over time, all things are brought under the rule of the government, and those in power can dictate the beliefs, actions, and lives of those over whom they rule. Nothing, not birth, not life, not marriage, not love, not sex, not the job you do, not what you eat, not what you drink, not who you meet, and not even what you think escapes the regulation and control of the state, as those in power seek to enforce their fictional ideals onto the reality of the individual. As this happens, the individual's ability to decide what he or she thinks, loves, or lives decreases and is brought more and more in line with the dictates of those who hold the levers of power. Our moral decision-making power, our liberty, disappears as the power of the state grows. But it is not us alone that lose our humanity and our liberty. In truth, they are one and the same. In the process of achieving their philosophical apotheosis, the scientific statists lose their own individualism as well. Trapped by their own dogma, they transform themselves into little more than mouthpieces of the doctrines that rule them along with all else. They lose the ability to recognize their own humanity in their own individual reality. Fervently believing their own doctrines, they lose their liberty to the machine they built. Understanding this dual enslavement helps us gain another great insight from Dr. Jung. The state's critics often talk about it as if there is a secret cabal of the rich and mighty, a George Soros or the Koch brothers, for example, who are plotting the domination of the nation or world. This is, of course, nonsense. There is no secret cabal who knows the truth. There doesn't need to be one. Those who gain power are exposed to the same mental conditioning that all of us are and believe in it just as much as most of us do. The politicians who gain power do so exactly because they are grand evangelists of the doctrines of the state, able to preach its glories the best by promising to use its power the most in the name of the collective, and they are the ones who attain the highest levels of power. It isn't because they're members of the New World Order, Illuminati, Bohemian Grove, or Bilderbergers. It's because they are mouthpieces for the cult of the state and preach its doctrines in the way their supporters most wish to hear. And Dr. Jung was absolutely right about how they're not needing to be men of good judgment or wisdom. As we've seen with Trump or Biden, the most important thing is that they are experts and believers in the doctrines of the state. They will then naturally act accordingly to their statist beliefs, resulting in maintaining and increasing the power of the government. Instead of being some great conspiracy, that is the very point and reason they are elected by the public. So this is an article written by William H. Douglas of thelatterdayLiberator.com. That's thelatterdayLiberator.com. Now, let's talk about this for a second. We look at Dr. Jung's work. We shared some quotes as well in the previous video of this series, and we have more part of this series looking at the psychology of the state, but we're seeing that the state is not the politicians or the people we put in power. It's actually the individuals, everyday people, the masses. Those are the ones who put them in power in the first place, but those are the masses that have this statist belief system. I'm going to put some questions on the screen for you. You probably saw this earlier on the video as well. You need to think about this because you probably never heard of statism before, or you really never questioned for yourself your own morality in relationship to politics. And this, psychologically, can mean a big deal for the world, considering the fact that it wasn't just 100 years ago where we had World War II take place and a bunch of people believing in their state leader and willing to do anything for them, willing to sacrifice their life and sacrifice other people's lives in order for the greater good collective, even though it ended up in chaos and it was just basically a part of history most people don't even want to look back on because of how bad it was. And people are like, well, how could that ever have happened? Stanley Milgram proved it in his experiments, and Carl Jung is talking about it. You know, so it's not like this isn't known. It's not like this can't be solved. It absolutely can. But again, most people aren't aware of the very belief system behind that ideology of following some authority figure, some person that you put in power to rule over your life. This is what we're getting to the root cause of, and I encourage that you learn more, and perhaps if you want to listen to an article, I'll turn it into a video for you. Visit theliberator.us. That's theliberator.us. Thank you very much for watching.